Welcome, shalom to all of you. Welcome to the second session of our first online Zohar class. Today is January 23rd, 2019, and we're continuing with the Hakdama, the introduction of the Zohar. Tonight we're going to complete the passage we were studying last week, and then we're going to look at a short parable from the Zohar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Zohar itself, and then we'll see where that takes us. Let me just say that we're only able to look at a small number of the chats during the session, so we'll respond to some of them tonight. And if your chat question has not been addressed, then please go to the Facebook page during the week. If you're part of that page, if you're not, please, you're welcome to join Zohar Zoom. And we've had a very fruitful discussion this past week there, and we'll certainly continue that. I'd like to begin with a short bracha for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O God, who has enjoined us to engage in words of Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Let's continue right where we left off. We're in volume 1 of the Zohar Pritzker edition, and we're on page 7. Rabbi Elazar has been expounding on that verse in Isaiah, raise your eyes up above and see who created these. And we spoke last week at some length about the Hebrew word me, spelled mem yud, which in English means who, and that is a name for the Sephirah of Bina. I think all of you have this diagram of the 10 Sephirot, and I'll assume that people have it printed out for this week. I'm not going to show it often on the screen, but I'll show it once right now just to get us started. This diagram, which you all have, and Bina, the Divine Mother, over here on the top left, she is known by that name Mem Yud, who, and she gives birth to the 7 lower Sfirot, Chesed through Shekhinah. So Rabbi Elazar spoke about Bina being that name, me, or who. I know that a number of people Eli, do you see me filling the page? I just want to make sure that
I don't. Right now, we just see your desktop. We saw
we saw
the document a moment ago.
Yeah. So let me get that. Just show me how I would. Oh, okay, I get to stop share, of course. Great.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay. So I know a few people mentioned in the chat that this reminded them of the old Abbott and Costello routine of who's on first. And someone said it really should be who's on third, because Bina is the third Sphira. There is a certain element of humor in the Zohar. I don't think the Zohar meant that as a joke, but that lets us try to remember that the Zohar does also include humor. Humor is part of the spiritual message. There's something very heavy, very weighty, and also very light about the tone of the Zohar, and I think we'll see that in a number of ways. So let's pick up here on page 7 of volume 1. Rabbi Shimon, we're near the top of page 7, the second paragraph. Rabbi Shimon said, Elazar, my son, cease your words, so that the concealed mystery on high, unknown to any human, may be revealed. Okay, Rabbi Elazar has spoken, and Rabbi Shimon wants him to stop now because there's something more profound, more concealed that Rabbi Shimon is about to reveal. Rabbi Elazar was silent. And there's something about the interplay of silence and speech that the Zohar is alluding to here. Obviously, the Zohar values words and values revealing the secrets, but the Zohar also respects the power of silence, and it's silence that allows for new communication to emerge. Rabbi Shimon wept and paused for a moment. Then he said, Elazar, what is these? Okay, you'll notice that word is in italics because we're back to the verse in Isaiah. Lift your eyes above and see who created these. So far we've explained who. The English word who, W-H-O, refers to Bina, but what about these? If you answer stars and constellations, they are always visible there, and were created by what? As is said, by the word of Yud-He-Vav-He, the heavens were made. So the first possibility is that these, the word these in Isaiah, refers to the stars and constellations. And that probably is what the prophet Isaiah has in mind. Who created these? Isaiah is asking that rhetorical question. Who possibly would have the power to create all of this wonder in the heavens? The stars and the moon, the constellations, all the heavenly bodies. So that is the simple meaning of the verse, but that's not quite adequate for Rabbi Shimon because he says, those are always visible. And the question, who created these? For Rabbi Shimon, that implies there's something new, there's something unexpected. So the stars and constellations don't quite fit the bill. And in any case, he says those were created by Shekhinah. As we've learned last week, the Zohar avoids giving the names of the Sfirot. One of the chats last week asked, why does the Zohar avoid those names? Why does the Zohar come out and say Bina and Shekhinah? Why all of these secret code words? I think it's partly to increase the aura of mystery. Right, the Zohar is a cryptic text, a mysterious text. The Zohar wants us to be puzzled by the language, and it prefers symbolic names to the actual names of the Sfirot. The system of the Sfirot has already developed, and the Zohar is fully aware of the term Sfirah in the singular and Sfirot in the plural. It knows all of the official names, Keter through Malchut, but it prefers to tantalize us with these code words. The English word who, we know, refers to Bina, and the English word what, in Hebrew ma, mem-he, refers to Shekhinah, that other question. What is this? What have you discovered? How do we know that Shekhinah, who is known as what, created the stars and constellations? Because there's another verse in Psalms, B'devar Adonai shamayim na'asu. By the word of Yud-He-Vav-He, the heavens were made. Now that verse does not use the word what, but it does use the expression the word of Yud-He-Vav-He. And Shekhinah is symbolized by the word. Shekhinah is God speaking his name, speaking revelation, revealing his nature and revealing the Torah through the medium of speech. So Shekhinah is that stage of the divine unfolding where we have articulate speech, where we have full words. And that's why that phrase, the word of Yud-He-Vav-He, is an allusion to Shekhinah. So this is a proof text. Rabbi Shimon is quoting that verse from Psalm 33 to show us that Shekhinah, in fact, created the heavens. And that's why he's saying that we can't say that Bina created the heavens, because Shekhinah created the heavens. As for things concealed, I'm continuing now, as for things concealed, such would not be referred to as these, for that word indicates something revealed. Okay, he's also excluding the very highest levels of the Sfirot. We can't be talking here about Keter, Chochmah, or Bina herself, because the word these is too explicit. It's too revealed to allude, to refer to something that hidden. So Rabbi Shimon doesn't really know what the meaning of the word these is, but he was told, he doesn't know that on his own, but it was revealed to him as he now explains. This mystery was only revealed one day when I was at the seashore. Elijah came and asked me, Rabbi, do you know the meaning of who created these? I answered, these are the heavens in their array, the work of the Blessed Holy One. Human beings should contemplate them and bless them, as is written, when I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you set in place, Yudhevave, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth. Okay, we can stay on this page for a moment. You know, normally when you finish a page, you turn it, but with the Zohar, when you finish a page, it's good to stay on that page. So all of a sudden, Elijah has made his appearance. This is the first appearance of Elijah in the Zohar. He's a remarkable figure, and he plays a very important role in the Zohar. You may recall that Elijah is described, there are a number of chapters in the Bible, in the book of Kings, that tell us about the career of Elijah. He's a very mysterious figure. He's one of the prophets, one of the early prophets. But unlike any other figure in the Bible, except for one, Elijah is taken up to heaven. The only other figure that we know who is spoken of in that way is Enoch, Chanoch in Hebrew. Enoch is mentioned in the beginning of Genesis. It says, Enoch was no longer, for God took him to heaven. So Enoch is taken up to heaven, but Enoch stays there. Elijah, it's much more interesting. Elijah is taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, according to the book of Kings. And it seems that he never died. In other words, he's taken up in his body, he's taken up while still alive and transported, or the term is sometimes translated. He was translated to heaven. But Elijah, unlike Enoch, Elijah then comes down again and reveals himself. Elijah is available to help people in need, to convey secrets of wisdom to the sages or to worthy individuals. And here, Rabbi Shimon says that he had an encounter with Elijah, and Elijah taught him something about the meaning of this verse. If you look down at note 43, this is on page 7, the right-hand column. Look at that note on Elijah. This is some interesting material. It's worth looking at here. Okay, I'm reading from note 43 down below. According to the Bible, 2 Kings, and actually you should correct this, it's a mistake. It's not chapter 11, verse 12. It's really chapter 2, verse 11. So it's 2 Kings, 2:11, not 11:12. So according to the Bible, the prophet Elijah did not die a normal death, but was carried off to heaven in a chariot of fire. He became associated with the Messianic age, and in rabbinic tradition, he's described as still existing. The Hebrew is Adayin Kayam. He's still alive, he's still existing, he never died. And he reveals divine secrets to righteous humans. In fact, the Kabbalah is first conveyed, according to Kabbalistic tradition, through Gilui Eliyahu, through a revelation of Elijah. Elijah, you could say, is the source of all of Kabbalah. It's a remarkable figure. He appears and disappears very suddenly. You might say he's the Jewish Lone Ranger. He shows up and helps people and then escapes. Often he appears in disguise. Nobody knows who he is at first, and nobody knows where he disappeared. So Elijah asked Rabbi Shimon at one point, what is the meaning of this verse? Who created these? And Rabbi Shimon responded with the very answer which a moment ago he rejected. Right? A moment ago he rejected the notion that these refers to the stars and the heavenly bodies. And that, in fact, is the simple meaning of the verse in Isaiah. When Elijah asked Rabbi Shimon, what does the verse mean? What does these mean? Rabbi Shimon said the heavens and their array. So he gave the very answer that he then says is wrong. Okay, we can turn the page now. How does Rabbi Shimon know that this is the wrong answer? Because Elijah told him. Elijah said to me, Rabbi Shimon is saying, okay, top of page 8. Elijah said to me, Rabbi, the word was concealed with the Blessed Holy One, and he revealed it in the academy on high. Here it is. Okay, the academy on high, in Hebrew, Metivta Ila'ah. Okay, Metivta Ila'ah, the Yeshiva Shamala, There's a heavenly yeshiva, a heavenly academy, corresponding to the earthly academy. In this academy, you find the souls of the righteous, and they get to study with the greatest teacher possible, with God himself. The Holy One, blessed be he, serves as the teacher for the souls of the righteous after they depart this world. And that the Zohar refers to very often, Metivta Ila'a, or Metivta Dirikia, the academy in heaven. You find that referred to in rabbinic literature, and it plays an important role in the Zohar. So and Elijah is able to convey the teachings that were given in that academy. Elijah visits that academy, and he brings teachings from the academy in heaven down to certain select individuals on earth. And now he's going to reveal a teaching that he heard in the academy and is going to help clarify the meaning of the word these. I'll pause here. We can look at a couple chats and see if I could respond to those.
I don't think we have any.
Okay.
Some are just coming in now, maybe, but I don't think we had any in the chat prior to this.
Okay, fine. If anyone wants to ask a chat, or we could even try Peter, Eli, we could call on an actual vocal question. We could try that.
Sure, yeah, go ahead, Peter, and then we can go to, there's a couple in the chat as well.
Great.
Thank you. This is amazing. Academy on High. Speaking about a physical, this is a spirituality, this is a state, right, of spiritual attainment. I mean, it's not in the sense of how we understand an academy, where we have to be there at 9 in the morning, work till noon, etc., like we do in the corporeal world. You explain. Is there any way to explain it more deeply? Because Heavenly Academy, righteous study with God.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know how literally the Zohar means this. He doesn't describe walls and benches and chairs and bookcases, or what kind of resources do they have in this academy. But I think the Zohar wants us to picture a kind of study hall. The souls of the righteous are there, and maybe they have ethereal bodies. According to the Zohar, every soul has an astral body or an ethereal body. So there is a type of spiritual body. There's a type of spiritual body that the soul has before it comes down to earth and after it leaves this earthly plane. So I don't think we have to, we don't have to picture in detail what it looks like, but it's a type of academy. I think we can just leave it at that. It's a type of spiritual realm. It's another dimension in which the wisdom, the divine wisdom, is conveyed. There are a number of chats, and let me look at some of the first ones that popped up here. Does the souls of the righteous, does that imply reincarnation? Okay, the Hebrew term for reincarnation is gilgul, literally rolling, right? A soul rolls into a new body. Here we're not talking about reincarnation. The Zohar does allude to reincarnation. We'll come across some passages. Later in Kabbalah, that becomes a general principle. For the Zohar, basically, you undergo reincarnation only if you've failed to observe certain very important mitzvot. If you haven't fulfilled your mission in the world, then you may come back to have a second chance. But here we're talking about simply what happens to the soul after death, and it's not the same as reincarnation. Is the relationship between Elijah and Tiferet? Elijah is not associated with a particular sphira. He's an angel, and all the angels are directly beneath Shekhinah. But Elijah is unlike any other angel because he was a human who became an angel, and he still has a personality. He has much more personality, much more free will, some frustration. He still retains some human qualities. So he's not one of the sphirot, but he's different than the other angels. Did I say that Elijah reveals the whole Kabbalah? Is he considered the source? Yeah, the early Kabbalists, according to a somewhat later Kabbalistic tradition, or there's a tradition toward the end of the 13th century that the earlier Kabbalists at the beginning of the 13th century, that they had what is called Gilui Eliyahu, a revelation of Elijah. So some of the earliest secrets of the Kabbalah are attributed to Elijah. In that sense, in that sense, Elijah does begin to convey the Kabbalah. What about Tiferet and Elijah? Up and down movement. All of the Sfirot can go up and down, and human souls can go up and down. Elijah is not a particular Sfira. In Arkwin's introduction, he says all realms outside the divine proceed from Shekhinah. Yeah, there are various worlds beneath Shekhinah, and the one that first emerges from Shekhinah is this world of the angels. There are angels surrounding Shekhinah, and then you have various levels of existence, finally, the material world. You often hear about 4 worlds in Kabbalah. The Zohar, really, the main part of the Zohar does not yet describe these 4 worlds. Sometimes it's seen as 3 worlds: the world of the Sfirot, the world of the angels or the chariot, and then the earthly world. We'll get into that a little bit later. Sefer Yetzirah is an earlier book attributed to Abraham. Yeah, different Kabbalistic writings are attributed to different authors. The Aramaic. Just one question about the Aramaic text. I know some of you are following in the Aramaic, and I'll refer to Aramaic a little bit tonight. And I want to talk about the Zohar and the Aramaic of the Zohar after we complete this passage from Elijah. But if you happen to have that page, Stanford's website, those of you who know some Aramaic, if you Google Stanford Zohar Aramaic, you'll come to the Aramaic pages. Anything underlined on those pages, the underlining means a change that I've made from the standard printed text of the Zohar based on manuscripts. I changed the printed text of the Zohar before translating it, and I adopted what I thought were better readings in the Zohar manuscripts. Whenever I make a change in the file of the Aramaic on Stanford's website, that's underlined. Yeah, SUP, the actual website someone put down, sup.org/Zohar, but it might be simpler if you just Google Stanford Zohar, you'll get there, or Stanford Zohar Aramaic. Someone's asking about the Aramaic, a chip, if you see a kind of a quotation mark in the middle of the word me, that single quotation mark is the medieval way of designating what we would use as a double quotation mark. In other words, if you see a single quotation mark in the middle of a word in Aramaic text, that means just picture that they're putting quotation marks around the whole word. Okay, I think let's go back now to the Zohar passage, and we'll pause again. I'm really glad that we can go back and forth, but I don't want to get too far away from the text itself right now. We'll definitely devote more time as we go and more time at the end. And as last time, I'm happy to stay afterward, after the official end of the class at 10:15 Eastern. I'm happy to stay at least another 20 minutes, half an hour for questions. Okay, we're at page 8, near the top. Elijah is now revealing the secret that he heard in the Yeshiva Shamala, in the Mativta Ila'a, the Academy on High. And this is really a description of the beginning of emanation. It's a beautiful, brief summary of how Ein Sof turns into the Sfirot, at least up to Binah, and then alluding to the lower Sfirot as well. When concealed of all concealed, verged on being revealed, it produced at first a single point, which ascended to become thought. Within it drew all drawings, graved all engravings, carving within the concealed holy lamp a graving of one hidden design, holy of holies, a deep structure emerging from thought, called me, who, origin of structure, existent and non-existent, deep and hidden, called by no name but who. Okay, let's pause there. That's certainly enough. So when concealed of all concealed, okay, the Zohar does not want to name the highest realm. This could be Keter or Ein Sof. I don't think we have to pinpoint it. It's some ultimate hidden realm, but it's obviously preceding even Chokhmah, so it must be Keter, or Ein Sof and Keter as one. So Ein Sof was on the verge of revealing itself. What did it first produce? A single point. Okay, we mentioned last name. This is one of the names of Chokhmah. If you look down at note 46, the primordial point of Chokhmah, the Hebrew and the Aramaic is Nekuda. Okay, Nekuda means a point, and this is Nekuda Kadma'a, the primordial point. Here it's Nekuda Chada, a single point, which ascended to become thought. In other words, Chokhmah is the divine mind. Chokhmah is the beginning of God's mental capacity. Ascended, we don't have to take too literally here. Chokhmah represents itself. Chokhmah turns into, becomes the divine mind. Within it, and it must take us back to Ein Sof or Keter, within the point or within itself, within this first realm. Within it drew all drawings. So Ein Sof is beginning to sketch out. Ein Sof is sketching out all of the Sfirot. They haven't yet emerged. Nothing has yet emerged except an initial primordial point. But there are already indications, hints, intimations, sketches of everything that will emerge. Carving within the concealed holy lamp. Down below I say that the lamp is Chokhmah, but I would question that. I don't think he's talking about a particular Sphira. The lamp, or what eventually is called the lamp of darkness, a lamp that is so bright that it is blinding. That lamp is really the impulse of emanation, not a particular Sphira, but just the radiance of God beginning to emerge. You know, someone is saying it should be descended and not ascended. I don't think we should understand it spatially here, but Chokhmah turns into, I think we could say, Chokhmah turns into thought. He may actually be using the word ascend because of a wording in the Talmud. Some of you may recall this, Kach Allah b'machshava lefanai. So it has arisen in thought. So it has arisen in my thought. And the Zohar might be playing on that. Someone mentioned the Big Bang and this emergence, Akiva, this emergence of an explosion of light, the first point of light, you could say a singularity. There are some striking parallels between the Zohar's description of the beginning and modern cosmology. I've explored some of that in the book God and the Big Bang. So Ein Sof is sketching out everything, and specifically a graving of one hidden design, Holy of Holies, a deep structure emerging from thought called me. Okay, luckily he finally says something we're familiar with, me, referring to Bina, who is called me, namely who in English, origin of structure. Okay, before Bina, all we have is a point, but the point begins to sketch out everything. The point turns into a circle. So this is a design, this is Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, a deep structure. This is the possibility of structure. The point turns into something more structural, more extended. The point is extending. So the extension of that point is what he's calling deep structure, emerging from the divine mind, emerging from Chokhmah, and that is what we know as Bina. Of course, he doesn't say Bina, he says me, but we already know that me refers to Bina. Existent and non-existent. Okay, we shouldn't get too confident that we can finally say something exists. This is of such a sublime nature that it has to be denied as soon as it's mentioned. Someone mentioned, is there a connection between Bina and Binyana? Interesting, Binyan. Binyan and Bina. That could be, let's see, what is the Hebrew here? Yeah, Binyana Amika. He calls it a Binyan. Binyana, he may be well playing on Bina and Binyan. Binyan structure and Binyana. Bina and Binyana, good. But lest we think that we can call this existent, he immediately denies it, existent and non-existent. Okay, this does not mean that God does not exist. It's really like that term ayin. Aleph Yud Nun, no thingness. The divine existence is beyond anything we can picture, beyond anything we can describe. So we have to deny that it exists in the normal sense of the term. Maimonides says the same thing, that God's existence is not in any category that we can apply to it. So the way the Zohar does that is to say it and immediately deny it. Existent and non-existent. We'll see this a number of times. Deep and hidden. Called by no name but who. Right? It's a name which is a question. And as we saw last week, we can't be guaranteed that this question will lead to any clear, specific answer. It's a question that makes us ponder, who am I? Who is God? Who am I? And it's the search for the answer that really is the answer. More than wanting a specific answer, we want to be engaged in that search. And that's what the Zohar is stimulating us to do with this poetic language. Someone also mentioned in the chat that we should think of Zohar as poetry, and I think that's very useful. The Zohar is not a theological treatise. It's not a philosophical work. It's a work of imagery and lyrical poetry, and that's how best to understand it. And Leonard mentioned the Zen koan. That's very useful here too. The paradox, the language of paradox, and paradox is very significant for the Zohar. You know, for a scientist or a mathematician, paradox is a problem. For the mystic, paradox is really the touchstone. In other words, if something is true, it has to be paradoxical. Unless it's paradoxical, it's really not fully true. Okay, let's continue now. So we've reached the realm of Bina, but we have a beautiful poetic summary there of the transition from Ein Sof to the point of Chokhmah to the Divine Mother Bina. Seeking to be revealed, to be named, it garbed itself in a splendid radiant garment and created Eile, these. Okay, so first of all, what is the subject? Who is seeking to be revealed? Ein Sof, you could say, is seeking to be revealed. Keter, Chokhmah, Bina. Okay, these are not separate entities. The divine beginning. We're talking here about the initial stages of emanation. God is yearning to be revealed. God wants to be known. God wants to be known by us. As Abraham Joshua Heschel said, God in search of man. Okay, God is seeking out humanity and wants to reveal itself to humanity. That's this whole process of emanation. Clothing itself in a garment. Someone mentioned Psalm 104. Right, there you also have the garment, or lavashta. The God is clothed in light. God is clothed in light as in a garment. Ote or kasalma. God is clothed and wraps himself in light as in a garment. And the Zohar often quotes that verse. Not here, but it may well have that in mind. So Ein Sof, Keter, Chokhmah, whatever stage we want to say, the initial beginning of the divine clothes itself in a garment, and that garment, you could say, is Bina itself, and created Eile, created these. Now these, in other words, refers to the lower Sfirot, right? That's what Rabbi Shimon learned from Elijah. These is not the heavens. You might think these is the heavens. Who created these? No, Elijah says. We've learned in the academy on high, the academy in heaven, we've learned that Eile means something beyond heaven. Eile means the Sfirot from Chesed through Malchut. Those 7 lower Sfirot are referred to as these. You can point to them. You can say something specific about them compared to the unknown nature of Bina and Chokhmah. Yeah, if people are raising their hands or chatting, let's pause all the questions for a moment. When we finish this paragraph, we finish this page, we'll pause for questions. Okay, so for the moment, please just focus on the teachings and the words here of the Zohar itself. Now he's going to talk about this word Eile. I put it here in Hebrew because the very letters of that word are important for the drasha of the Zohar. Eile attained the name. These letters joined with those culminating in the name Elohim. I'm going to read the whole paragraph and then we'll make sense of it. Until it created Elah, it did not attain the name Elohim. Based on this mystery, those who sinned with the golden calf said, Elah, these are your gods, O Israel. Just as me is combined with Elah, so the name Elohim is constantly polysemous. Through this mystery, the universe exists. Okay, let's go through this. So what is happening to the Elah? Elah attains the name. In other words, Elah turns into a fuller name. Elah turns into the name Elohim. But what do you have to add to Elah to get the word Elohim? Two letters that we've already seen, the letters Mem and Yud. Okay, of course, the word Elohim has a final Mem, which you may not recognize immediately as being the same as a Mem, but it is a Mem. So the name Elohim is composed of two words, Elah, these, and me, who. Me we know refers to Bina. Elah we now know refers to these 7 lower sfirot. So the name Elohim combines Bina and all of her 7 children. The name Elohim extends from Bina through Malchut. Until Bina created Elah, until Bina emanates the lower sfirot, it's not fully Elohim, because Elohim has to include Elah. Until it emanates, it's only the question me. Once it emanates the Sfirot Chesed through Malchut, it's much fuller. It's given birth. It's a mother with children. She's fulfilled, and she has manifested fully as God. She has manifested as Elohim. Based on this mystery, what happened at the golden calf? The Israelites, of course, at Mount Sinai, when Moses takes his time up there with God, right, he's up there with God for 40 days and 40 nights, and the Israelites are getting very impatient, and they demand that Aaron make them a calf, a representation, and they worship the calf, and what do they say to the calf? These, Elah, these are your gods, O Israel. Okay, it's actually Aaron who says that, I believe. These are your gods, O Israel. So what are they saying? According to the Zohar, it's not that they worshiped a calf. The Israelites would never have done something so stupid, so evil as to worship an idol. What was their mistake? Their mistake was that they fixated on the 7 lower sfirot. They cut off those lower sfirot from Bina. Instead of being aware of the totality of God, the children of Israel became fixated on the 7 lower sfirot, which are known as Elah, these. And that's why they said, these are your gods, as if neglecting the higher realm of divinity. That was their mistake. According to the Kabbalah, according to the Zohar, that's one of the cardinal sins. I think I mentioned last week, it's called kitzutz, cutting off the plants, cutting off one sfirah from another. Just as me is combined with Elah, so the name Elohim is constantly polysemous. You might not have seen this word recently. Okay, this is a word meaning simply of multiple meaning. The word Elohim has several meanings. Through this mystery, the universe exists. Now, what does he mean? What does he mean by saying the name Elohim is constantly polysemous? And actually, those of you who are following in the Aramaic, the word Elohim is not there in the Aramaic. You really should put brackets around it. It's not in the second to last line of that paragraph. It's not so the name Elohim is constantly polysemous. It's really so the name is constantly polysemous. But he means the name Elohim. Okay, I know there's some questions and chats, but I want to just wait another minute or two. I want to say something more about this expression. The name Elohim is constantly polysemous. The other word to use in English is equivocal. Okay, we may think of equivocal in a different sense, but in medieval philosophy, that term is used, equivocal, meaning that it can mean various things. So the name Elohim is equivocal. What does that mean? Elohim can refer to God. Elohim can also refer to angels. The angels are called B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. Elohim can also refer to human judges. We have in the Torah portion in a couple weeks Elohim referring to human judges. So that's what the Zohar means here by saying the term Elohim is of polysemous. The Aramaic is ishtataf, ishtataf. And this is a good example of how the Zohar is influenced by Maimonides. I want to show you something, a text here for us to look at for a moment. This is, if you look here at quote number 4, this is from the Guide of the Perplexed. I have just the Hebrew here, but I'll translate it. Kvar yada kol ivri, every Hebrew, every Israelite knew, ki shem Elohim, the name Elohim, mishtatef. That's the technical term in medieval Hebrew for polysemous, for equivocal. The name Elohim is equivocal, and literally it participates. It participates with God, Lashem, the divine name, Ula Malachim, and it participates with angels. It can also refer to angels, Ula Shoftim, and to judges, to human judges. Okay, this is from the Rambam, Moshe ben Maimon, Moreh HaNevuchim. So Maimonides uses the word mishtatef to mean equivocal, polysemous. It participates in several meanings. What does the Zohar say here? Number 7, Shema d'ishtataf tadir. That's the line we just read in English. Constantly polysemous, ishtataf. So he's taking that word ishtataf, he's drawing directly on Maimonides, mishtatef. We have another quote here, which is from another part of the Zohar. This is called Midrash HaNe'elam. It's an early stage of the Zohar, the concealed Midrash, or the Midrash of the concealed. There, Rabbi Abahu says, talking about the name Elohim, Shem Zehu Mishutaf. This name is equivocal because the Malachim are called Elohim, humans are called Elohim, and judges are called Elohim. Okay, he's taking it directly from Maimonides. The Zohar is influenced here by Maimonides. And Moshe de Leon, he was probably the author of much of the Zohar. One of his books called Sefer HaRimon, Moses de Leon says simply, Shem Elohim hu Shem Mishutaf. The name Elohim is an equivocal name. So that's one fine example of how the Zohar is influenced by its context, by what's being written, what's being discussed in philosophical circles of the time. And it actually uses a word, ishtataf, really borrowed from Maimonides' own language. Okay, we'll just conclude this and then take some questions. Then Elijah flew off. Okay, Elijah gave the secret to Rabbi Shimon. Elijah disappeared, and he often disappears quickly, even in the Bible. I did not see him, Rabbi Shimon says. From him I discovered the word. Okay, I got the message. When the Zohar says the word, it means the teaching. It's not one word, but in here it really does focus on the word Elah. So maybe you're saying, I finally found out what that word Elah means, whose mysterious secret I have demonstrated. Rabbi Elazar and all the companions came and bowed down in front of him. Weeping, they said, if we have come into the world only to hear this, die. It is enough. Right? On Passover, Pesach, we say, Dayenu. Excuse me, Dayenu. It is enough for us. And here, Rabbi Elazar and the Chavraya, the companions, they say, if we've come to the world just to hear this one word of teaching, it's enough for us. It's enough. It's a beautiful expression of gratitude for wisdom. And you have that occasionally in rabbinic literature and more often in the Zohar. Okay, I know there are a good number of questions that have built up. Let me ask first someone who hasn't yet asked a question tonight. We can start with a few chats. Go back to...
And Daniel, I know Anne has had her hand up for quite a while.
Let's start with Anne's question. There's so many chats, it's hard to navigate through them right now. Yes, Anne, you had a question?
I actually had, can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So first, going back to first I was just struck with the beauty of what you wrote, what you read. It's just so gorgeous. It's amazing. So thank you for conveying that.
Good. It's really beautiful poetry, and I think we have to appreciate the Zohar as literature, not just as theology.
Yes.
And even if the sense isn't immediately clear, the power and the the color of the language conveys a lot.
Yes.
Good.
So my question was about Hashmal with the silence and the speech at the beginning, is there, and they don't discuss it, they don't mention it, but it reminds me of Hashmal, which does come later in the Zohar.
Uh-huh.
I wondered if you had something to say about that, and then I had something else.
Yeah, the term chashmal that Anna's referring to, that the beautiful Hebrew word used by Ezekiel.
Yes.
It's a word that comes only once in the whole Bible. It's not clear what it means. It obviously means something flashing, something powerfully flashing. And as I'm sure you know, that became the word in modern Hebrew for electricity.
Yes.
So it's beautiful that the Ben Yehuda, Eliezer Ben Yehuda, I think it was he who assigned that word from the prophet Ezekiel to the new phenomenon of electricity.
Yes.
There's a midrash on that word that you're referring to, chash and mal. Chash, silence, and mal, like milah, lamalel, to speak. So silence and speech. The Zohar does refer to that elsewhere. Here it doesn't mention it, but that is an example of the Zohar's appreciation of the combination of silence and speech and how you have to leave room for both.
How do you have, where is the midrash?
The midrash, I don't recall at the moment. It may be in Chagiga.
Okay.
I don't recall. But the literal meaning of the term in Ezekiel is something other than that. It's not clear what it is, but it's something flashing. It's something to do with light. Before Mary has a question, before that I just want to respond to something Don Cashman said that in the chat. Yes, we're talking here about the Hebrew translation of Maimonides done by Ibn Tibon, Shmuel and Yehuda Ibn Tibon, medieval translators. Maimonides' great book, The Guide of the Perplexed, was written in Arabic and was translated into Hebrew. Moses de Leon probably did not know Arabic so fluently, but he read it in Hebrew, and it's there that he came across that term, mishtatef, that he probably turns into ishtataf. So Mary has a question, and then we'll look at a couple chats too.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Nice to meet you by video chat, Mr.
Yes.
Matt. It drove to my attention that you mentioned that the Shekhinah creates the heavens, and it's the only Sephirah who actually creates the heavens. So my question is, are the 7 heavens created there? Since each heaven has a level, I never actually considered that they could be created in just what we think it's Malchut.
Yeah, the Zohar adopts this image of 7 heavens, right, which appears in a lot of sources. The Talmud itself speaks of Shiv'a Riki'im, the 7 heavens, and it gives names to them. For the Zohar, sometimes those 7 heavens are parallel to the 7 Sfirot. Here, the Zohar is saying Shekhinah created the heavens. The Zohar is not going into detail here about the 7. Okay, later we'll definitely find references to 7 heavens. Here, I think the Zohar means in a more general sense that Bina creates the lower Sfirot, and the last of those Sfirot emanates or creates the lower worlds, including what we call heaven. Here, we don't have any detail about the levels of heaven. Other places we do.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Something having to be paradoxical in order for it to be true. Yeah, the Zohar loves to bridge opposites. Much of the Sfirot is really about balance between opposites. Don't just focus on chesed, divine love. That outpouring of divine love or your own expression of love might get you in trouble. It might be too much for the recipient to handle, as I mentioned last week. So it's important to balance one pole with the other pole. And this has to do with the possibilities of meaning as well. For the Zohar, opposites can both be entertained. Okay? Even God includes both good and evil We shouldn't say that God is just associated with good. God is also the author of evil. And obviously, when we use language, when we use our normal thought processes, we want to find out what's true and what's false. We want to reject the false and focus on the true. And in that sense, paradox is something to be avoided. Paradox is something to be overcome. But the Zohar is suggesting that we get beyond our normal ways of thinking and our normal ways of understanding. We should allow for example, existent and non-existent. Yeah, and paradox keeps you thinking, as someone says. You don't stop at a certain point. You can't say, I now have the truth. I can write down the truth in one phrase, I can put it in my pocket, and now I know ultimate truth. For the Zohar, truth is something that's constantly unfolding. You can't be satisfied with any current formulation. This has to do with the nature of God as well, right? The ultimate nature of God can't be expressed in words. So it's either silence or paradox that allows you to keep an open mind. There's something more hidden. Zhenya is saying paradox is, don't be satisfied with your current belief system, as part of what the Zohar is saying. It's criticizing the normal formulations of belief and of what we think is real. There's something more real than the real. There's something behind the curtain. The four worlds doesn't appear in the Zohar. Where does it first appear? It first appears in very late sections of the Zohar. What we're studying is the Zohar that was composed toward the end of the 13th century. There are some early imitations of the Zohar known as Tikkunei Zohar, the embellishments on the Zohar, and Ra'aya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd. Those are part of the larger Zohar literature, but they were composed maybe a few decades after much of what we call the Zohar. Those other later compositions, the early decades of the 14th century. And it's there that you first have spelled out the doctrine of the four worlds. That becomes standard Kabbalah with Isaac Luria. That becomes official Kabbalah. But the Zohar itself does not yet talk about four worlds, and we'll see the ways in which the Zohar describes that. Melvin has a raised hand. Yeah, if you have a question. If you can unmute yourself momentarily and
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. What is the concept? How does the concept of sacred and profane enter this formulation? What is sacred and what is profane?
Yeah, sacred and profane is a good example of that dualism, and much of the time the Zohar is very concerned about that distinction. It's very important to empower the holy and to disempower, to defeat the profane or the demonic. There is a struggle between the holy and the demonic. Ultimately, it can be overcome. Ultimately, there's even a way in which evil is somehow a tool of God, that God is using evil, what we think of as evil, for a certain purpose. So there's a way, finally, in which that dualism is overcome. But the Zohar is very concerned with kadosh, right, and chol, what's holy and profane, what's tahor, pure, and tameh, impure. Those opposites are very operative for much of the Zohar, even if ultimately there's the hope of overcoming them. There's really an alternative structure. We have 10 sefirot, and there's a whole other side of God, right? What's called Sitra Achra, the other side. Sometimes the Zohar describes 10 stages of that realm. So there are 10 holy sefirot, and then there are 10 demonic levels, 10 demonic sefirot, as it were. And one is a mirror image of the other. Part of the struggle between good and evil also has to do with the social reality of the time. Remember, the context here is Christian Spain in the 13th century. and there's a struggle going on between Judaism and Christianity, and Judaism is what is holy and Christianity is what is demonic. That's also very much there behind the lines, in between the lines of the Zohar. And we'll see examples of that. So even though ultimately there's a unity, the Zohar is moving back and forth between dualism and unity. And I think that's very much the case for any spiritual seeker. You can't dwell permanently in a state of oneness. If you try to do that, you'll bump into something or someone. Yeah, I think we move back and forth between living in a dualistic consciousness and then having glimpses of something beyond, some unity. Right? You could say we have a tension between God being one and God becoming one. According to the Aleinu, right, in that day God will be one. So isn't God one right now? God is one. But in a sense, the oneness of God is not real as long as there's still suffering, as long as there's still hatred. God is not fully manifested as long as we still dwell in that dualism.
Dan, can I ask one question?
Let's take one or two. I think we have to ask other people for questions because I want to just devote a few more minutes to questions, and I want to move to the parable that I hope you all have printed out for tonight. So if someone else has a question, please.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
It's Eva. The first three words in Torah, Reshit bara Elohim, can you read these now in terms of what you've taught? That what's created in the beginning is Elohim.
Yeah, you're really alluding to something we're going to come to eventually, but since it'll probably be quite a while till we get there, certainly not in this first course and probably not for a good amount of time. I would guess maybe half a year. I will say a word about that. The Zohar gives a remarkable description of those first three words, Bereshit bara Elohim. We often translate that, we usually translate that, in the beginning God created, but the order of the Hebrew is what? Bereshit, in the beginning, bara, created, Elohim, God. So it's not in the beginning God created, it's in the beginning created God. Now that seems to put the subject after the verb. God is obviously the subject of the sentence, and yet there the subject is coming after the verb, but we do that occasionally in English, in very formal English, right? You might say, thus spoke the king. It means, thus the king spoke, but you can get away with putting the subject after the verb. So you might say that's how we should read it, but the Zohar adopts a more radical reading, and maybe you're hinting at this. Bereshit, now the letter B can mean in or with. The Zohar takes it to mean with. With Reshit, now what is Reshit? Reshit is beginning, and we've seen that that's a name for Chokhmah. Chokhmah is the primordial point, so Chokhmah is actually called Reshit. Chokhmah is beginning. So the Zohar reads it with beginning, bara, created, but you could also translate that it created. It with beginning, it created Elohim. Elohim becomes the object of the sentence. It's not in the beginning God created, it's with beginning, with Chokhmah, the unnamed one, and so for Keter, the unnameable, created Elohim. And Elohim we've seen is a name for Bina, right? It's Bina because she's me and Elah. Bina includes within herself Elah, these lower sphirot, so she's given that name Elohim. That's how the Zohar reads the opening words of the Torah, with beginning, with Chokhmah, and Sof created Elohim, and Sof created Bina. It's a shocking interpretation, and the Talmud actually warns us against translating the Torah too literally. The Talmud says, be careful how you translate the Torah, because if you're not careful, you might say something ridiculous like, Bereshit created Elohim. Almost exactly what the Zohar does choose as its interpretation. If you want to look ahead and find that, it's the very beginning of Zohar on Bereshit, right? We're reading the Hakdamah, the introduction. In this volume, it's on page 107. You can look at it on your own, 107 to 110. We'll definitely spend a whole session on that at some point some months from now. But that is very startling and beautiful and profound, shocking teaching of the Zohar. In the beginning, it created God. You might say you have there a critique of theology. What we think of as God is somehow less than the totality of God. And it doesn't mean that God was created. It means the ultimate reality of God, Ein Sof, emanated the lower stages, the relatively lower stages, which we think of as God. Okay, the last question for now from Jack, and then I want to move to the parable. We can look at some of the chats after class and then during the week on Facebook. Jack, what did you want to ask?
Yeah, so you touched upon this in your most recent answer, but still looking for a little clarity. I feel like I understand, Keter being the first introduction and Bina creating the other 7 Sfirot,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure really what role Chachma is playing. Why was Reshit, why was Chachma necessary to bridge Bina, Keter and Bina, and thus the 7? So clarity of Chachma.
Yeah, so the role of Chokhmah is so tiny you can almost disregard it, but Chokhmah is the first thing you can point to. Okay? It is a point, it's a ray of light emerging out of this ocean of infinity. Okay, if Keter Ein Sof is just the infinite, the boundless, the no-thingness, the undifferentiated energy, nothing specific there that we can identify. Chokhmah is the first ray of light that shines forth out of that mystical darkness, that brilliance which is so brilliant it blinds us. Chokhmah is something specific, and that's why it's given that name Reshit. Keter is before the beginning, and Sof is before the beginning. Reshit is a point. Chokhmah is that point that then can expand. Everything begins from a point. So Bina is already more than a point. Bina is the point becoming a full line or a full circle. And Chokhmah is the point, which is a seed, which is planted in the womb of Bina. So that's the origin. The Zohar sometimes gives it the term in Hebrew, yesh. Yesh meaning there is, but you could also translate that something. Yesh is something emerging from the no-thingness, from the nothing. Okay, I want to turn to this parable from the Zohar. I sent it to all of you as an email, as a PDF, and I hope you have it printed out. If you have volume 1 in front of you, it's also in volume 1 of the Pritzker edition at the end of my translator's introduction. So if you have the volume, it's on page XXV, okay, 25 with Roman numerals. If you turn back, this is before Art Green's long introduction, near the beginning of the book, 25 pages in. XXV, you'll find the parable there. And if you don't have it in any form, don't worry, it's a very short parable, and you can just listen to it. I'm going to read it and say a word or two about it, and then people are welcome to ask questions. And Sherry, I promise that we'll take your question when we're done with the parable as the first question after we finished discussing the parable. This is a parable that comes in the middle of the Zohar. In the Pritzker edition, it's in volume 5, and there it's discussed in much more detail, but it's such a simple parable, it's good to start talking about it simply. And this is a parable about Torah. There was a man who lived in the mountains. He knew nothing about those living in the city. He sowed wheat and ate the kernels raw. One day he entered the city. They offered him good bread. The man asked, "What's this for?" They replied, "It's bread to eat." He ate, and it tasted very good. He asked, "What's it made of?" They answered, "Wheat." Later they offered him thick loaves kneaded with oil. He tasted them and asked, "And what are these made of?" They answered, "Wheat." Later they offered him royal pastry kneaded with honey and oil. He asked, "And what are these made of?" They answered, "Wheat." He said, "Surely I am the master of all of these, since I eat the essence of all of these, wheat." Because of that view, he knew nothing of the delights of the world, which were lost to him. So it is with one who grasps the principle, but is unaware of all those delectable delights deriving, diverging from that principle. Okay, we have here a mountain man, and he's a health food fanatic, you might say. He's surviving on raw kernels of wheat, and that seems to be enough, but he comes into town one day, and he's offered actual bread, and he's curious about it, and he tastes it, and he likes it. He enjoys the bread. Then he asks a question, what's it made of? They say wheat. They give him the next stage. Now it's not just bread, but challah. And here, notice he's more hesitant. Doesn't say he ate, it says he tasted. He asks his question, what's it made of? They say wheat. Then they give him the ultimate delight. You could say baklava. And here, notice he doesn't even taste. He just immediately asks his question, what's it made of? They say wheat. He says, I know wheat. I'm a master of wheat. I have the essence. And the Zohar says, because of that, he lost out on the delights of the world. So it is if you grasp the principle, but you're unaware of all that that principle could turn into. Someone chatted that this is a critique of essentialism, and I think that's very true. After all, you can't deny that this person has the essence. He has the essence of it all. But the Zohar is saying it's not enough to have essence. Now that's very interesting, because usually in mysticism, the goal is to get to the essence, right? If you have the essence, why bother with all the fancy things in the world? You can survive on what's most simple. If you have the essence, nothing else is very important. And certainly that is a mystical discovery, but for the Zohar, that's only the beginning. You might know the essence, but don't get stuck. Yeah, essence is elusive. Don't get stuck on the essence. Don't limit yourself to the essence. Appreciate everything that essence could turn into. This is also the paradox. The essence is to get beyond the essence. The most important thing is not to be trapped by the essence. You could say this person is wallowing in essence, and someone has chatted pardes. Okay, this is certainly about pardes. Many of you know what that term is, but let me explain it. The word pardes, it's a beautiful word. It comes in the Song of Songs, and it means an orchard. It actually is a word from Persian that entered late Hebrew. The word pardes means an orchard. There's a famous story in the Talmud, in the tractate Chagiga, about 4 rabbis who entered the orchard, right? One of them is Rabbi Akiva. Of those 4, only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and emerged in peace. Of the other 3, one of the other 3 rabbis cut the plants, which may mean he became a heretic. Another of the rabbis went mad, and another of the rabbis died. Only Rabbi Akiva, nichnas b'shalom, v'yatsa b'shalom, entered in peace and emerged in peace. Later, not in the Talmud itself, but later, that term pardes is seen as an acronym for the 4 levels of interpretation. And the Zohar is clearly referring here to 4 levels of Torah. Pshat, the P of the word pardes stands for pshat, the simple meaning. That we could say here is the raw kernels. Resh and Dalid. Resh is remez, which means hint or allusion, but in medieval Hebrew it refers to allegory, philosophical allegory. We could just say a philosophical reading of Scripture, trying to derive some philosophical insight from Scripture. Dalid is for drash or midrash, and samach is for sod, the mystery. So the 4 levels are literal, the pshat, and really we should put the Dalid before the resh. Dalid drash, because midrash comes before philosophy, chronologically. We have pshat, the literal meaning, midrash or drash, the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, both legal and legendary, all kinds of rabbinic interpretation, expanding the meaning of Torah. Then we have a philosophical reading, the remez, the hint, and finally the Kabbalistic sod, the Kabbalistic mystery. So those are the 4 levels. And that we have here. The kernels is the pshat, the bread is midrash, turning the Torah into good rabbinic interpretation. And notice the mountain man does appreciate that transition. Then comes the philosophical reading, the challah, the thick loaves kneaded with oil. And finally we come to the baklava, and baklava sounds remarkably like Kabbalah. So the baklava is the Kabbalah, right? Sometimes English works even better than Aramaic or Hebrew. That royal pastry kneaded with honey and oil, the ultimate secret. What happens here? The mountain man never gets to taste that because he's so fixated on the essence. He's so convinced that he has the truth, right? He calls himself master of all of these. So it's his claim to mastery, his sense of self-importance is the obstacle for him. Yeah, the 4 levels, they represent 4 different types of fruits on Tu B'Shvat. That is similar. Here he's applying them to 4 kinds of wheat product. Any other thoughts or questions about this? I think we can turn to a spoken vocal question here. Anyone have a thought or an insight, a reflection?
I have a question. It's Brian.
Please. Yeah.
I was wondering, doesn't the Zohar usually prefer natural settings or people of the land over cities or city dwellers? And I'm wondering why this mashal flips that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the setting for so much of the Zohar is walking on the way, coming across fields or mountains or rivers, appreciating the beauty of nature, right? Here we find, in fact, what we just read, where did Rabbi Shimon meet Elijah? Not in the house of study, not in an earthly academy, but by the seashore. So it's nature that provides the setting for much of the wisdom. Here there seems to be a critique of this man who lives totally in nature. It's unusual. You might say, I think the Zohar intentionally wants us to wonder, is this person the hero or has he missed the point? Right? Because until the very end, we don't know whether this person really is to be praised or criticized. Because after all, usually in mysticism, as I said, the goal is to get to the essence. This man lives in nature. He has the essence. We would expect to appreciate him. And then the Zohar turns it on its head. So maybe intentionally the Zohar is, setting him up as if he's the hero, and then pulling the rug out from under him or out from under us and our understanding. I almost think the Zohar inherited a parable where this man was the hero, and then the Zohar says, no, just the opposite. Because for the Zohar, it's not enough to have the essence. You have to see all the possible meanings of Torah. And the point is here, don't go for the pshat, don't be limited to the pshat, but also don't be limited to the sod. Right? Appreciate all the possible transitions. Maybe he's at fault for having an answer, not for seeking an essence. Yeah, part of the problem here is the people in town, they're not teaching him very well. They say wheat, and they should say you take the wheat and this is what you do to it. You take Torah and you open up its possible meanings. Someone asked, is there another version? No, I have never come across a version that ends, before that last paragraph. I just think maybe the Zohar is offering a critique of the normal approach to mysticism, which is, aim for the essence. Okay, it's good not to beat this to death. It's a beautiful parable, really simple and profound, and we'll come back to it. I think we can make transition now. Sherry had a question for quite a while, and please, you can ask it. Let me just say, in case anyone has to leave soon or leaves before we conclude, for next time we will continue pages 17 to 25. I'll remind people of that in an email, but we're going to move on to page 17 in volume 1 next time. Sherry, please.
Shalom. So all of this is really cool about Pardes and Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, and I love everything you're talking about. My question came prior, has to do with Chochmah, Bina, Da'at, and where do you see Da'at or do you not see da'at.
Yes, this question of da'at came up a number of times this week, and I just want to encourage people to, to make use of the Facebook page. I know some people have bad feelings about Facebook, and some people avoid Facebook. Some people don't want to have anything to do with Facebook. But if you don't mind and you are on Facebook, or you might even consider joining and do nothing with your own account just to be part of that group, it's a wonderful forum for discussion. I'll be happy to respond now, at least briefly, about da'at. But it is a way for us to talk during the week, so please consider joining that. Again, it's Zohar Zoom. Da'at is this mysterious sphira, and if we talk about it at all, it is in connection with Chokhmah and Bina. There too we have the opposites, Chokhmah on the right, masculine, Bina on the left, feminine. Da'at would be the balance between the two. It would be an awareness, literally da'at is knowledge. So it's the knowledge that combines the flash of insight of Chokhmah and the deeper understanding of Bina. So a full awareness, a full knowledge, you might say experiential knowledge of God. Sometimes it's represented as the whole middle column, as if, it's not just between Chokhmah and Bina, but extending up toward Keter, extending down through Tiferet, Yesod, Malchut. So it's the spine or the middle column. The problem is that if we include da'at, all of a sudden we have too many sfirot, because there are 10 sefirot, and that early text, Sefer Yetzirah, says Eser velo tesha, 10 and not 9. Eser velo achat esrei, 10 and not 11. So there have to be 10 sfirot. If da'at is included, then Keter is sometimes identified with Ein Sof. So Keter is no longer a separate sphira. Keter would be part of Ein Sof, one with Ein Sof. And then we have Chokhmah, Bina, Da'at, the first triad, and continuing with the other 7 sphirot. The Zohar doesn't refer that often to Da'at. It does occasionally. We'll run across it now and then. Jikatila, in his book Sha'arei Ora, The Gates of Light, he doesn't have a separate chapter on Da'at. Later it becomes more significant with Isaac Luria, and of course Chabad Hasidism takes its name from that triad. So I would leave it, it's the mysterious sphira, and that, I think we'll leave it at that for now. Yeah, see, someone is, my Zoom isn't working. I'll reiterate my previous question regarding realms, a heavenly court where prayer can occur, where human judges go. What other realms are there in the heavens? I mean, for the Zohar, the heavens are the physical heavens, and then the 7 levels of heaven, and the angels dwell in heaven. So sometimes, of course, the term heaven can also symbolize Tiferet. So heaven could mean the heavens that we see with our eyes, or it actually could be a name for God. And even in the Talmud, you have Shamayim sometimes as a designation of God. So it can be a divine name, and it can house the Yeshiva Shamala, the Metivta Derikia, the Academy of Heaven, and the abode of the angels. It's a pretty elastic term. Gabriel has a chat here. Does Elijah represent a certain state of mind or an approach through which he's able to see the true meaning of things? Yeah, I think Elijah is the between earth and heaven. So he himself was human and became an angel, and then he communicates to people, he makes himself available to people. To have an encounter with Elijah is seen as a great state. This phrase, Gilui Eliyahu, the revelation of Elijah. In the Talmud, you have dozens and dozens of stories of individual rabbis who met Elijah or were taught something by Elijah. And also, I think you could see it as a meditative state as well. One might pray or fast in order to attain an encounter with Elijah. Maybe Elijah also really is the state of mind that allows you to innovate. to come up with a new interpretation of Torah, somebody might say, I came up with it, or I thought of it, but a mystic would feel that as if something is communicated to him by an angel, by a supernatural figure, and very often by Elijah. So he's the means by which Torah is renewed. Presence in the Zohar. Okay, presence is a good name for Shekhinah. Right, Shekhinah is really the presence, the divine presence in the world, literally dwelling, but God's dwelling in the world. So you might discover Shekhinah in a very unexpected place. And for the Zohar, if you greet another person, it's as if you've greeted Shekhinah. That notion comes in the Talmud. One who greets his teacher, it's as if he greeted Shekhinah. One who greets his fellow, it's as if he greeted Shekhinah. So to be open to the divine light, to be open to the divine quality within another person, that is a way to encounter God. There's a way in which the interpersonal relationship between two human beings can actually be an encounter with God. Martin Buber speaks about this, where the I, thou becomes an opportunity for encountering the eternal thou. Yeah, Yosef has a question, but I want opportunity for people who haven't asked a question yet. Any, let's see if various chats from earlier. Yeah, Bina is both who and who in these. Yeah, in other words, before Bina gives birth to the lower Sfirot, she is not completely fulfilled. So she is just known by that name, who. Once she gives birth, then she includes Elah. So Mi turns into Elohim. The Zohar isn't always consistent with that. Elohim is a name for Bina. Sometimes, as tonight, the Zohar breaks that into two words, Elah and Mi. Sometimes it's content just to call Bina Elohim. I'm sorry, I need to show it there. Betty, you were raising your hand? Do you have a question? Maybe that's from some time ago. Okay. Did the Baal Shem Tov speak of these concepts from the Zohar? Yeah, this is a good opportunity to answer a question from chat that came up last week. What's the connection between Hasidism and Kabbalah, or Hasidism and the Zohar? All of Hasidism is based on Kabbalah, which means Hasidism is based on the Zohar. We mentioned Chabad, right, is taking its name from Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at. The Baal Shem Tov sometimes quotes from the Zohar. The Baal Shem Tov, according to one account, was able to gaze into the Zohar and see the entire world. Okay, because the Zohar opens you up to a broader vision. And often the Hasidic masters will quote a line, a phrase from the Zohar and then expound on it. A lot of Hasidic teaching will begin with a brief quotation from the Zohar, but really all of Hasidism is based on the ideas that we're exploring in the Zohar. I see iPad Ruti has raised her hand. Please ask. You're welcome to ask a question. If you can unmute yourself, Ruti.
Okay, you mentioned that Ella, Bina is Ella, and then when Bina came into, like, it became Elohim. So
Yes.
Ella is more feminine, sounds like more feminine. Does it has to do with Bina being, like, transforming Elohim from feminine to masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, here he's not using the word Elah, which could be goddess. It's the Hebrew Elah, Elah meaning these.
Oh,
So
okay.
Bina is definitely the divine mother, Eila refers specifically to her children. So those children would be both masculine and feminine. So Bina is feminine, but as I mentioned last week, sometimes Bina herself is described as part of the world of the male. So you have some variation there too. How does time work in the Zohar? When we say that Bina gave birth to the other Sfirot, is that a sequence of events? Is it ongoing? Yeah, the Zohar does speak of the 7 lower Sfirot as the 7 days of creation, but there also is an eternal process, an eternal flow, an eternal creation. The Zohar speaks of creation not being a one-time event, but God animating or reanimating the world day by day, moment by moment. The hidden light, the light is hidden away, but one ray issues forth and vivifies the world, animates the world. So the Zohar interprets the creation and speaks about one day after another. And obviously there's some awareness of the Chavraya meeting and then experiencing the past and the present. But at times the Zohar breaks through to this eternal now, to the eternal moment. Olam haba, right? The world that's constantly coming. Yes.
I see Betty is raising her hand physically.
Great.
Remind her to use the button if you can to raise.
So I'm unmuted.
But
Okay.
Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
Okay. So the Shekhinah is basically feminine, but at times it becomes masculine. And I'm wondering, is it based upon the situation that it becomes? Obviously based on the situation. So can you say something about when Shekhinah becomes masculine?
Yes. So Shekhinah is certainly feminine, and she and Bina are the 2 overtly feminine Sfirot. The Zohar sometimes describes her as Melech, king, in terms of her relationship to the world. When she rules over the world, she's known as king. I think that has something to do with the limitations of gender in the Middle Ages, by which I mean it's hard for the Zohar to imagine a woman conducting the world or ruling the world. I mean, it's not hard for us to imagine a queen, but for the Zohar, somehow when Shekhinah is powerfully ruling the world, the authors of the Zohar, I think, feel more comfortable picturing her as king. So I think that's part of what's going on there. But the majority of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, Shekhinah is clearly a female and has feminine qualities, as we'll see.
Definitely. When she's in Malchut, she's definitely feminine, but in order to connect with Tiferet, that connection that they make.
Yeah, I mean, so the union, Susan will definitely come to you in a moment. The union of the female and the male, that is the focus of the Zohar. That's really the whole point of Torah and mitzvot, is to unite Shekhinah with her partner, to unite the female with the male. When they unite, in a sense, we're really beyond gender. Okay? Tiferet and Shekhinah become a unity that's neither masculine nor feminine, okay? That's both masculine and feminine. So in that sense too, you get beyond male and female. And all of the Sfirot can be incorporated, reincorporated into Bina, returning to the mother, returning to the womb, and maybe ultimately returning to Ein Sof. Sometimes the Zohar alludes to that. Susan has a question.
Yeah, when you were just talking about Olam Haba, the world of constantly becoming, it reminded me of something that you wrote on Zohar Zoom during the week about the idea of like a constant emanation. Like this didn't just happen once, but there's this constant becoming. And how does that fit with the idea of the Big Bang? And like, is it, you know, sort of the alpha and omega, like there was this big bang and now it's all gonna you know, expand. So,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
so yeah.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting comparison because, you know, a cosmologist would say that the Big Bang has never stopped. The Big Bang began as an immense explosion, although cosmologists don't like to describe it exactly as an explosion, but certainly, as you say, an expansion or an inflation, uh, gradually slowing down and then apparently speeding up, right? With most recently, from about almost 20 years ago, cosmologists discovered that not only is the universe expanding, but it's actually accelerating. So that initial expansion, that initial Big Bang has never stopped. We are part of this expansion. I mean, in our local neighborhood, our solar system, our galaxy, even our group of galaxies, or our local neighborhood of galaxies, okay, we are not literally expanding, but we're being carried along by the expansion of the universe. So the Big Bang has never stopped, and the emanation has never stopped. So you could say science and Kabbalah both share that insistence on it being an ongoing process. Bina brought the world into existence, but Bina is still streaming and flowing. And through meditation, one can actually plug in to that flow. One can focus on Bina, and one can meditate by asking that question, who? Who am I? Who is God? One can be part of that process of unfolding and not be stuck, you know, in the particular psychological state that we have. Because I think we really should appreciate the Sfirot as a kind of psychology, right? We have to remember that psyche, the Greek word psyche really means soul. And the Zohar is offering a spiritual psychology. So we're talking about the Sfirot not just as divine qualities, but as states of our own being, as stages of our own awareness. And we can enrich that awareness and consciousness by questioning, being open to new understanding.
That's great. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. Yeah, about going back to that question of heavens, Mary, will come to you in a moment. Question of heavens, what else, what other unseen realms are there? Yeah, for the Zohar, there are unseen forces that are operative, both holy and threatening forces. And the point is here, none of us has a full picture of reality. A lot of the stories in the Zohar are two rabbis walking on the way and running into someone, and the person who seems to be a fool really has wisdom. Something that may happen, a snake may bite someone, or a snake may be about to bite someone and then be killed by another creature. There's some reason for what happens. There's some underlying narrative of which we're not aware. So the sense of mystery is a constant theme, both in heaven and on earth. We're not aware of what's behind the curtain. Mary, you have a question, please.
Yes, for me, it was actually shocking to hear that cosmologists don't like to call Big Bang as an explosion. It's like something revealing. What does cosmologists call the
Yeah,
Big Bang?
I think one
Or
reason.
how do they describe it?
Yeah, you know, the term Big Bang was invented by someone who was opposed to the theory. Fred Hoyle, who had a different theory of creation, which he thought the universe was eternal and did not have a beginning. He described this other theory, which we now almost all of us accept. He called it the Big Bang. Some people say he was kind of making fun of it. He denied that. But in other words, Big Bang did not come up as a description by someone who believed in the theory. It came up as a description by someone who was opposed to the theory. The reason that cosmologists don't like the explosion is because for something to explode, it has to happen within a closed structure. Okay, you can have an explosion in a room or, you know, a defined space. And the point is, at the beginning of time, at the beginning of creation, all there was, nothing existed except for this singularity, for this primordial point. It's not that the point was in something bigger. The only space that existed was that point. Now, that's almost impossible for our minds to comprehend. Believe me, I don't have a clear understanding of it either. I'm just conveying what I've learned from cosmologists. But it's better to think of it as an expansion and inflation rather than what we call explosion.
It is very curious because last week I was in a Torah class and they were mentioning something about that Bereshit cannot be the Big Bang because something created from a destruction could not come from God. And right now that you're saying that Big Bang is actually not an explosion,
yeah, it's not
really
something
revealing for me.
Yeah, it's not something destructive, you know. The Talmud itself, the Midrash itself says that God created worlds and destroyed them, that there were prior worlds. You have this in Bereshit Rabbah, the Midrash on Genesis. God created worlds and destroyed them. He said, those don't please me, this one pleases me. So you have a lot of different and conflicting descriptions of the beginning of time. I don't think anyone really understands it, but there's something wondrous about the parallels. You do certainly find some parallels between Big Bang cosmology and Kabbalah, and I've explored those in the book that I wrote, God and the Big Bang. And we'll talk about that a little bit more other times. Miri has a question.
Yes, hi. Hi there. I'm a little bit stuck on the name and the word Elohim as being a plurality as opposed to a unity and a oneness. So can you just go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, any name we use for God is ultimately going to be inadequate. Okay, I think we have to start by saying that. And Kabbalah really is criticizing the notion that you can assign an accurate name to God. That's the whole point of Ein Sof, right? Ein Sof is beyond Elohim, Shaddai, even Yud-He Vav-He. Okay, we'll talk about how Yud-He Vav-He sometimes is seen as encompassing all of the Sfirot. Sometimes it's specifically Tiferet. Sometimes it includes all of the Sfirot, Yud, He, Vav, He. Each letter refers to different Sfirah or Sfirot. Elohim is such an intriguing name because, as you mentioned, it is plural. So what does that mean that we have a name for God? Even let's even leave Kabbalah aside for the moment. What does it mean that the Torah uses a plural name for God? Because after all, the oneness of God is something basic not only to Kabbalah but to the Torah. There's one God and no other God is real. So how can you have this word Elohim? And what makes it more challenging is that Elohim is actually used sometimes in the Bible to refer to other gods. It's a name for God, Elohim, but also you have right in the Torah, don't worship other gods. Don't worship other Elohim. So sometimes the word Elohim is intended to be plural. But usually when we find it in the Torah, we find it as a name for God, and it's very important that it comes with a singular verb, right? As in Bereshit bara Elohim. The simple meaning is God created, right? It doesn't say Bereshit baru Elohim. It doesn't say the gods created using a plural verb. The Hebrew verb is singular, which shows us that Elohim is singular. So what does it mean that the name for God is a plural? Most biblical scholars say that this is really a vestige. This is a remnant of some earlier state of Israelite theology where there was a plurality of gods and there was a chief god who was known as El. Okay, it goes by various names. In other words, at some point before Israelites came to the belief in one God, they believed in a plurality of gods. And at a certain point, there was a breakthrough, there was a transformation, there was a revolution, and God became a single God. But the name Elohim still persisted. Okay, so the plural nature of that word Elohim reminds us that there was a theology before monotheism. And that eventually turned into monotheism. It, excuse me. It retained the plural word Elohim, but now that word is referring to the single God. It's interesting. Sometimes you have the word Elohim with a plural verb, okay, or with a plural adjective. But in the overwhelming majority of times, it's singular. Now, to come to the Kabbalah itself, Bina is known as Elohim, but the word Elohim, you remember, is equivocal, right? It's polysemous, right? It's mishutaf in Hebrew. It can refer to various things. So Bina is not the only sphira that's known as Elohim. Gevurah, that sphira on the left, can also be called Elohim. Shekhinah can also be called Elohim. And the angels could be referred to as B'nai Elohim, the sons of Elohim. So it's a pretty ambiguous term. When it refers to Bina, it means that she includes within herself various divine forces. And the passage we read tonight was explaining that as Elah. She is me and she is Elah. But that's a reminder to us about the plural character of that word. I'm sure I haven't answered you completely, but hopefully I've given you enough to think about for a little bit. And
thank you. That was great.
We certainly can continue it on the Facebook page. Maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll end this session. And anyone else? If there's a question, we'll take it. Otherwise, I'll respond to one of the chat. Peter, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just wondering about what you were saying about the Creator, about God not being satisfied with, His creation, and that leads me to think that God, all-encompassing, all-perfect, all benevolent love, could actually create something that He's not satisfied with, as though He has an ego that He's dealing with. Something to that effect. I'm trying to make sense of that He would be dissatisfied with the world that He created at some point and then start again. Is there anything you can add to that? Give it some more clarity.
Yeah, it sounds a little strange, but before the Zohar, before the Kabbalah, in the Midrash is filled with theological statements that seem very unusual. That God, or the Bible itself, God is saddened, right? God can feel sad about humanity's failings, right? And you have an amazing story in the Talmud. I'm sure you probably know of it, and most people may be familiar with it, but it's so beautiful. Where the rabbis are having a debate, and one rabbi loses out, right? Rabbi Eliezer is outnumbered by the other rabbis. They're talking about a very technical point of ritual impurity. And Rabbi Eliezer has a certain view, but the majority decides another way. And Rabbi Eliezer refuses to give in. He says, if I'm right, let that river outside run backwards. And the river changes its course and runs backwards. But one of the rabbis says, we don't listen to rivers. We've decided this according to our procedure, and this is the law. Rabbi Eliezer says, well, if I'm right, let that tree be uprooted. And a tree is uprooted. But the other rabbi says, we don't follow uprooted trees. Finally, Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, let the walls of this house of study begin to cave in. And the walls start to incline. But the other rabbi stops them and says, what business is it of yours to incline? We're discussing Torah here. And finally, Eliezer says, look, if I'm right, let a voice come from heaven. And a voice comes out of heaven and says, why do you dispute with Rabbi Eliezer? He's usually right. But the contending rabbi says, lo ikotz the Torah, lo bashamayim hi. It's not in heaven. In other words, the Talmud is saying that the rabbis themselves can make a decision and cannot be overpowered even by a divine voice. Now, what's amazing is the punchline of the story is really immediately the Talmud continues saying that Rabbi Natan, a while later, Rabbi Natan ran into whom? Into Elijah. He ran into our friend Eliyahu Hanavi, he ran into Elijah, and he asked Elijah, how did God respond to that whole dramatic encounter? What did God say at the end of that story, of the rabbis outvoting Rabbi Eliezer and not being swayed by even supernatural events? And Eliyahu says that God said at that point, Nitzchuni banai, Nitzchuni banai, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. So what is this? This is Elijah reporting on something God said, what God felt. And God felt that he was defeated by his own children. So even though God is all powerful, God pulls back. God relinquishes some of his power and gives it to us. God enables us to run the show, to act as if we have free will, as if we can determine something on our own. That's like the parent pulling back from the child. That's a way to understand Tzimtzum in Kabbalah. God withdrawing, God allowing us to assert ourselves. So I mentioned that story as an example of how radically the rabbis already, okay, hundreds of years before we come to the Kabbalah, the rabbis are willing to picture God in ways that seem very different than the normal philosophical view of an omniscient, omnipotent, transcendent God. God cares about humanity, and God is wrestling with humanity, and God can be helped, or God can be disempowered, God can even be defeated, but be defeated in the way that a parent delights when his own child can beat him or her in chess, right, or in sports, or in a game of Scrabble. A parent is delighted when the child wins, and God can also be delighted and be happy to relinquish some of that power. It's only the beginning of an answer to your question. Let's take one final question from Ani, and then we'll pause till next week. Please.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
My question is, I put it in the chat, but I wanted to ask it this way also. I wondered, I know you gave us some meditations in the Facebook group, and what I wonder is if it might be possible for you to give us some meditations each week that correspond to some of what we're learning, either in the section in the Zohar or our conversation, just so that we can really fully enter, not just with our minds and our intellects. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful suggestion. I'm sure many people are taking this course because they want to enrich their own spirituality, and others are taking the course because they want to study and analyze this amazing text, and I want to leave room for both of those. But we've done a lot of talking and analyzing, so it's a great suggestion. And that gives me an opportunity to mention a verse that I think would be a beautiful meditation. I wanted to read this verse tonight. So just jot down this chapter and verse. You can look at it yourselves later. It's in the book of Psalms, and it's Psalm 46, verse 11. 46:11. The Hebrew is Harpu udu'u ki anochi Elohim. Sometimes it's translated desist and know that I am God, but really the best translation is the way Robert Alter translates it in his new translation of the Bible. This book of Psalms he translated years ago, but now the full translation is out. What does that mean, harpu? It doesn't mean desist. It means let go. Let go, and you'll know that I am God. Let go and know that I am God. And maybe let's conclude just with a moment of silence, sitting together, relishing the silence, and focus on that. Let go. In other words, let go of whatever is holding onto you, whatever you're holding on to, a mental fixation, a tension, something that's troubling you, either mentally, psychologically, emotionally, interpersonally. Let go of whatever constriction at the moment is tying me into knots. Let go, and thereby I can attain an awareness, a glimpse of the divine. Harpu udu'u ki anochi Elohim. Let's share a moment of silence with that and then we'll conclude. Harpu udu'u ki anochi Elohim. Okay, let's come back together. Shalom. We'll continue a week from tonight.